In his pristine office, with a sweeping view of the bustling city below, Frank sits in his leather chair, gazing out at the horizon. His mind drifts back in time, revisiting a past he has long tried and failed to escape. 2 decades ago, in a life-altering decision, he left Laurie, his then-girlfriend, who was facing an unplanned pregnancy. He justified his departure with the promise of a bright future in Europe, an opportunity arranged by his father, leaving Laurie with a painful choice ahead. "Frank, the meeting with the investors is in 30 minutes, his secretary interrupts, snapping him back to reality. He nods, thanking her with a gesture. Yet his heart remains distant, ensnared in memories of Laurie. Later, at home, after a solitary dinner, Frank stumbles upon an old box of photographs and letters. He hesitates, but curiosity prevails. Among these relics of simpler times, he finds a photo of Laurie. His eyes well up with tears, a rare sight for a man who has built a fortress around his heart. "Laurie, where are you now?" he whispers to himself, the weight of loneliness pressing on his chest. Did she have the baby? She must have. That night, Frank barely sleeps, tossing and turning as the ghost of the past haunts him. By morning, he resolves to find out what happened to Laurie and the baby. But where to start? Social media, perhaps? Or should he hire a detective? His first step is to search for her online. He spends hours searching, but Laurie seems to have disappeared without a trace. Each failed attempt strengthens his resolve. "I need to find her," he decides. "I need to know if she's okay." Yet the real question that plagues him is what he will say after all this time. What will he say after all these years? Frank knows the road ahead is uncertain, but one thing is clear: he can no longer flee from the past. He must face the consequences of his decisions once and for all. Frank is in front of his laptop, sending one last email before bed. He has hired a private detective to locate Laurie. "It's time to correct the mistakes of the past," he whispers into the darkness, a mix of hope and fear throbbing in his heart. Frank begins his day with renewed determination, but his efforts to find Laurie remain fruitless. Hours turn into days, and each lead ends in a dead end. Frustration mounts, but so does a resilience he never knew he had. He refuses to give up, despite the obstacles. In contrast to Frank's frantic search, Laurie lives a quiet and modest life in a small town. She works as a teacher, a job that allows her to stay close to her son, Harvey, who is now a curious and intelligent teenager. Laurie has raised Harvey alone, instilling in him values of respect and kindness, but she has always avoided the subject of his father, saying only that he was someone they couldn't stay with. Harvey, now 15 years old, embodies resilience and unconditional love. He has inherited Laurie's expressive eyes, but there is something in him that always reminds her of Frank, a memory she keeps in her heart, but has never shared with her son. On a quiet afternoon, while Laurie is preparing dinner, Harvey approaches her with a question she has feared for years. "Mom, who is my dad? Why do you never talk about him?" The simplicity of Harvey's question hurts Laurie more deeply than she expected. She looks at her son, searching for the right words, but all she can say is, "He was a very special person, but our paths had to part." Harvey nods, realizing this is a delicate subject for his mom, and decides not to press further. Meanwhile, Frank receives the news that the detective he hired was also unable to locate Laurie. The information hits him like a blow, and for a moment he feels tempted to give up. However, as he looks at Laurie's photo on his desk, his determination strengthens. "I need to find her," he murmurs, more to himself than anyone else. Night falls, and Laurie sits next to Harvey, watching a TV show. As she watches her son laugh, Her heart fills with love and gratitude for the life they've built together, despite the adversities. Yet, deep down, she knows that the truth about Harvey's past must still be faced. Frank, on the other hand, spends another restless night, tossing and turning in bed, consumed by the search and memories of Laurie. He knows the road ahead will be difficult, but the hope of finding Laurie again and perhaps meeting the son he never knew keeps him going. On an apparently ordinary morning, fate sets the stage for a long-awaited encounter. Frank, on a business trip, arrives at the airport, his mind still occupied with the relentless search for Laurie and the son he never knew. He walks through the terminal, absorbed in his thoughts, barely noticing the crowd around him. Laurie, on the other hand, accompanied by Harvey, is also at the airport. They're on their way to a math competition where Harvey, now a brilliant and promising young man, has been invited to participate. It's a trip Laurie faces with a mix of pride and anxiety, knowing that opportunities like these are rare and valuable. The encounter happens by chance, at a moment when they both cross the same crowded hallway. Frank, distracted, nearly bumps into Laurie. As he looks up and sees who it is, his heart leaps. Laurie? He can hardly believe that after so much time and effort, she is there, right in front of him. Laurie, equally surprised, hesitates for a moment. Frank's voice, so familiar yet distant, takes her back to a past she has tried to leave behind. "Frank?" she responds, unsure of how to feel. Beside her, Harvey observes the exchange of glances between them, sensing the tension and surprise. He has never seen Frank before, but something about the man catches his attention. Frank, for his part, cannot take his eyes off Harvey, seeing in the young man a reflection of himself. The airport, with its constant flow of people, seems to quiet around them. Frank takes a step forward, trying to find the right words. "I've been looking for you," he begins, his voice full of emotion. "And who is this?" he asks, pointing to Harvey, with curiosity and hope shining in his eyes. Laurie takes a breath, preparing to answer, but is interrupted by Harvey's voice. "I'm Harvey," the young man says, extending his hand in a gesture of courtesy that seems beyond his years. Frank, genuinely, returns the greeting, feeling an instant and inexplicable connection. Before they can talk further, a boarding announcement reminds them of the world around them. Laurie checks the time and then looks at Frank. "We have to go," she says, her voice full of reluctance. "But how can I find you again?" Frank asks, desperate not to lose the connection he has just found. Laurie hesitates, fear and hope battling in her heart. Finally, she quickly writes her number on a piece of paper and hands it to Frank. "Call me," she says, before turning and heading towards the boarding gate with Harvey. In the days following the encounter at the airport, Frank finds himself in a whirlwind of emotions. The image of Laurie and the young Harvey does not leave his mind. Finally, gathering courage, he decides to call the number Laurie gave him. The phone rings 3 times before she answers, her voice hesitant on the other end of the line. "Laurie, can we meet? I need to talk to you," Frank says, trying to stay calm. After a brief pause, Laurie agrees. They arrange to meet at a discreet cafe in the city, a place where they can talk without interruptions. When Frank sees Laurie enter the cafe, his heart races. She looks the same, although time has left its subtle marks. They exchange cautious greetings before sitting down. The initial silence between them is heavy with years of separation and unspoken words. Frank is the first to break the silence. "Laurie, that day at the airport, the young man with you, Harvey, he is..." He pauses, unable to finish the question, the weight of the possibility crushing him. Laurie takes a deep breath, knowing that the moment of truth has come. "Yes, Frank, Harvey is your son." The words fall between them like a stone, causing emotional shockwaves. Frank feels as if the ground has disappeared beneath his feet. "My son," he whispers, almost to himself, a mix of disbelief and joy overwhelming him. "Why didn't you tell me?" Laurie looks at Frank, her eyes filled with sadness and resolve. "At the time, it seemed like the only option. You were leaving, you had your plans, and I didn't want to be a burden," she explains, her words laden with painful memories. Frank shakes his head, struggling to process the news. "I would have stayed," he says, his voice filled with remorse. "If I had known." The hours that follow are spent talking, unearthing the past with its joys and sorrows. Laurie tells Frank about Harvey's early years, how she struggled to raise him alone, the sleepless nights, the first steps, the first words. Each detail is a blow to Frank's heart, each moment he missed, each milestone he couldn't share. "I want to know him. I want to be part of his life," Frank says, determined. "Is it too late for me?" The vulnerability in his voice is something Laurie has never heard before. Laurie watches Frank, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "It's not too late," she responds slowly, "but we will need time. Harvey doesn't know about you. He has the right to know, but it needs to be on his terms." Frank nods, understanding the delicacy of the situation. "Thank you, Laurie, for this opportunity," he says, gratitude overflowing in his words. After the meeting with Laurie, Frank finds himself in an emotional storm. He drives back home, but his mind is elsewhere, trapped in the day's revelations. The idea of having a son, Harvey, a young man who grew up without his presence, is a reality he struggles to accept. At every stoplight, at every turn, Frank is haunted by the weight of his past choices. When he gets home, he barely notices his familiar surroundings. He heads straight to his small study, a space full of memories of a simpler time before his decisions took him away from Laurie. Sitting at the desk, he holds his head in his hands, trying to make sense of the conflicting feelings consuming him. "How could I?" he murmurs to himself, a mix of anger and despair in his voice. "How could I not know?" The guilt for having left Laurie, for having been absent in his son's life, hits him hard. He remembers Laurie's words, how she struggled alone, and his heart tightens. Frank spends the night awake, reliving moments from the past and imagining all the moments he missed with Harvey. He thinks about Harvey's first words, his first steps, his achievements and challenges, all without him being present. The pain of that realization is almost unbearable. At dawn, Frank decides he needs to do something, anything, to start repairing the damage done. He knows the road ahead will be difficult, but he also knows he can't give up now that he knows of Harvey's existence. "I need to be part of his life, somehow," he decides, a feeling of determination growing within him. In the following days, Frank dedicates himself to learning everything he can about being a father. He reads books, watches videos, and even seeks advice from friends who have children. Each new piece of information is a reminder of the lost time, but also a step toward the future he hopes to build with Harvey. At one point, Frank finds himself looking at an old photograph of Laurie, a memory of a time before everything changed. "Laurie, I'm so sorry," he murmurs softly, almost as if he hopes she can hear him. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this," Frank said determinedly as he contacted Laurie again, expressing his desire to be involved in Harvey's life in any way she deemed appropriate. He proposed gradual meetings, respecting Harvey's feelings and space. Frank waited anxiously for Laurie's response, hoping for any sign that she would allow him to be part of Harvey's life. When the phone finally rang, he answered on the first ring, his heart pounding. However, what Laurie had to say was not what he expected at all. With a weak voice that Frank barely recognized, Laurie shared news that left him paralyzed. She was gravely ill. The seriousness in her voice and the pause filled with emotion between her words left Frank breathless. "I don't know how much time I have left, Frank," she confessed, her words laden with deep sadness. Frank's initial shock quickly turned into determination. The guilt and remorse he had felt for years of absence were now mixed with a resurgence of the love he had always felt for Laurie, a love that had never completely disappeared. "You need the best treatment, Laurie. Please let me help you," he implored, his voice firm despite the emotion threatening to overflow. Laurie hesitated, used to facing life and its challenges alone. But the sincerity in Frank's offer and the concern in his voice broke down the barriers she had built over the years. "Frank, I don't know what to say," she murmured, moved by his offer. "Let me take you to New York," Frank insisted. "We can find the best doctors, the best treatments there. It's not just for you, Laurie. It's also for Harvey. He shouldn't lose his mother so soon." The mention of Harvey finally made Laurie relent. The idea of leaving her son so early terrified her more than the illness itself. "Okay, Frank, I accept your help," she said, with a mix of relief and fear in her voice. In the following days, Frank took all the necessary steps, organizing the best medical treatment money could buy. He contacted specialists, scheduled appointments, and ensured Laurie would receive priority care as soon as they arrived in New York. When the day of the trip came, Frank met Laurie and Harvey at the airport. Harvey, who had been informed about his mother's condition, looked at Frank with a mix of curiosity and caution. Frank approached the young man, offering an encouraging smile. "We're going to take care of your mom together," he said, putting a hand on Harvey's shoulder. The trip to New York was calm, but filled with tension and anticipation. Laurie, though frail, showed resilience, her inner strength shining even in the face of adversity. Frank, for his part, was determined to do everything he could to help, motivated not only by guilt, but by a genuine desire to correct past mistakes and offer Laurie and Harvey the hope of a better future. Upon arriving in New York, Laurie was immediately admitted to one of the best medical centers in the city. Frank stayed by her side, being a pillar of support as she began her treatment. Despite the challenging situation, there was an undeniable sense that they were together in this fight, a family united by adversity, hope, and above all, the love that against all odds had stood the test of time. Arriving in New York marked the beginning of a tumultuous journey of emotions for Laurie, Frank, and Harvey. As Laurie began her treatment at the renowned medical center, tension and uncertainty floated in the air. A cloud of fear and hope intermingled. In the early days, Frank and Harvey frequently found themselves in the hospital hallways, their conversations initially marked by awkward silence. Harvey, grateful for Frank's support of his mother, was still cautious, trying to understand the role of this stranger who had suddenly become a constant presence in their lives. However, as the days passed, the unexpected situation began to weave improbable bonds between father and son. Frank shared stories of his own life, including the mistakes he had made and the lessons he had learned. Harvey, for his part, began to open up, sharing his passions, fears, and dreams for the future. Between visits to Laurie's hospital room and quick coffees in the cafeteria, a connection began to form. Timid and hesitant, but genuine. It was during one of those conversations that the news came. The doctors had completed a thorough review of Laurie's diagnosis. Frank and Harvey received the information together, side by side, when the doctor entered the waiting room with a visibly lighter expression. "I have good news," the doctor began with a cautious smile on his face. After a detailed review of Laurie's tests and a series of additional examinations, we discovered there was an error in the initial diagnosis. Her condition is serious, but, contrary to what was previously reported, it is treatable. The doctor's words fell on Frank and Harvey like refreshing rain after a long drought. A mix of relief and disbelief enveloped them, and for a moment neither of them could speak. Then, almost simultaneously, they looked at each other, a smile shining on their faces, a reflection of the renewed hope now filling their hearts. In the following days, as Laurie continued her treatment, the dynamic between her, Frank, and Harvey began to change. The initial desperation was replaced by cautious hope, a hope that strengthened with each advance in Laurie's treatment. Frank stayed by her side every step of the way, offering unwavering support, while Harvey found comfort in the presence of his father, a man he was just beginning to know but already starting to respect and, perhaps, love. Laurie's illness, which initially seemed like a farewell sentence, became a catalyst for healing old wounds and strengthening long-worn family bonds. As Laurie fought for her health, Frank and Harvey fought by her side, no longer as strangers, but as a family united by adversity and the hope for better days. As Laurie's treatment progressed, a new chapter unfolded in the family's life, marked by the blossoming of a once unthinkable relationship between Frank and Harvey. The adversity that initially brought them together under somber circumstances now wove bonds of understanding and affection between them. Frank, determined to make up for lost time, made an effort to include Harvey in his life, sharing not only stories and life lessons, but also simple day-to-day moments. They explored the city together during the intervals in Laurie's treatment, visiting museums, parks, and places Frank had known since his youth. These seemingly ordinary moments became special, cornerstones in the construction of their relationship. Harvey, initially doubtful, began to see Frank in a new light. The constant presence, the genuine interest in his life and dreams, and Frank's willingness to listen, really listen, made the young man gradually open his heart to his father. He started sharing more about his school, his friends, and even his deepest thoughts, things he had previously kept to himself or shared only with Laurie. Laurie, for her part, watched the development of this relationship with mixed feelings. There was a sweetness in the way her son and Frank interacted, a reminder of what could have been if circumstances had been different. Every shared laugh, every look of mutual understanding between father and son filled her heart with joy, but also with a deep sadness for the time Frank had missed with Harvey, years that could never be recovered. In her sleepless nights, when the silence of the hospital room became almost deafening, Laurie reflected on the course of her life. She thought about how, despite all the difficulties, she had managed to raise an incredible son, who now had the chance to build a relationship with his father. It was an unexpected gift, a ray of light in the midst of the storm they faced together. The treatment continued, and with each passing day, Laurie saw Frank and Harvey growing closer, an invisible bond strengthening between them. This new dynamic brought a sense of completeness she hadn't felt in a long time, a feeling that, despite everything, her family was finally finding its union. Laurie shared her observations with Frank in moments of quiet, expressing her gratitude for his presence, not only for her, but for Harvey as well. Frank, for his part, acknowledged the lost time, but also committed to making the future different. "We're in this together," he said, taking Laurie's hand like a family. And so, as Laurie fought for her health, a new hope emerged, not only for her recovery, but for the rebuilding of a family that, against all odds, found its way back to each other. As Laurie's treatment progressed, the positive results began to manifest, bringing relief and joy to each family member. The news of her complete recovery arrived like a breath of new life, dispelling the shadows of fear and uncertainty that had settled in their hearts. The possibility of a future together, once faint and distant, now became vibrant and full of promise. With Laurie's health restored, the family found themselves in a moment of rediscovery and reconnection. Frank, Laurie, and Harvey began to explore the meaning of being truly reunited, not just because of Laurie's condition that had brought them to New York, but as a family united by bonds of love, forgiveness, and understanding. Returning to everyday life brought the opportunity to create new memories together. Frank, eager to make up for lost time, planned outings and activities they could enjoy as a family. Whether it was a simple picnic in the park, a visit to a museum, or a game night at home, every moment was cherished and celebrated. Laurie watched the transformation in her family with a heart full of gratitude. Seeing Frank and Harvey together, laughing and sharing stories, healed a part of her that had been hurt for a long time. There were still moments of sadness, reflections of years of pain and loneliness. But now those feelings were accompanied by a sense of hope and happiness. Harvey, who had grown up in the shadow of the mystery about his father, was adjusting to the new reality. Frank's constant presence in his life, once a source of confusion and caution, had become a cause of joy and security. He began to understand the meaning of having a father, not just in theory, but in the daily practice of care, attention, and unconditional love. Amidst this phase of healing and rediscovery, the family also faced the challenges of dealing with the secrets and silence that had marked their separation. Difficult conversations took place, revealing old pains and misunderstandings that needed to be addressed. Frank and Laurie, in particular, spent time talking about the past, expressing regrets, and forgiving each other for the decisions they had made. These moments of vulnerability and honesty further strengthened the bond between them, allowing them to heal old wounds and build a solid foundation for the future. Open communication became the key to overcoming obstacles, helping them to better understand themselves and each other. As the family navigated this new phase of their lives, it became clear that, although the scars of the past would never completely disappear, the strength of the love and forgiveness they shared was powerful enough to overcome any adversity. Together, they began to envision a future full of possibilities, united not just by blood, but by a conscious choice to be together, to heal, and to love. Laurie's recovery not only brought a renewal of health, but also the opportunity to face truths that had been hidden for a long time. With the family now on a path of reunion and healing, Laurie knew it was time to reveal to Harvey the whole truth about his father. This decision, filled with anxiety and hope, marked one of the most significant moments in the family's journey. On a quiet afternoon, with the golden rays of the sun gently filtering through the living room window, Laurie called Harvey to sit with her. Frank, aware of what was about to happen, gave them space but stayed close enough to offer support. "Harvey," Laurie began, her voice trembling with emotion, "there is something very important we need to talk about your father." Harvey looked at his mother, feeling a lump in his throat. He had always known this day would come, but facing the reality now seemed terrifyingly final. Laurie continued, choosing her words carefully but with an honesty that left no room for doubt. She told Harvey about her relationship with Frank, the circumstances that separated them, and most crucially, about Frank's decision not to be part of Harvey's life at that time. She explained how their reunion in New York had changed everything, how Frank desperately wanted to correct the mistakes of the past and build a relationship with Harvey. Harvey listened in silence, every word from Laurie weighing on his shoulders. The revelation that Frank, The man who had tried so hard to connect with him was his real father, left. Harvey stunned. A complex mix of emotions overwhelmed him. Anger at Frank's absence, relief at the truth finally revealed, and deep confusion about what this meant for his identity. After the conversation, Harvey walked away, needing time and space to process the enormity of the revelation. He wandered aimlessly through the streets of New York, each step resonating with his mother's words. The city around him seemed indifferent to his internal crisis, a metaphor for his struggle to find his place in a world that suddenly seemed very different. Frank, meanwhile, waited anxiously at home, tortured by uncertainty about how Harvey would receive the news. When Harvey finally returned, the two looked at each other in a charged silence. Frank took the first step, approaching cautiously. "Harvey, I know this is difficult, and I know I made mistakes, but I am here now, and I want to be part of your life, if you'll let me." Harvey, struggling to maintain his composure, nodded, unable to articulate a response. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the truth about his past had been revealed, and with it, the possibility of building something new. In the following days, Harvey gradually began to accept Frank as his father, not without moments of tension and hesitation. The revelation had triggered an identity crisis, but it also opened the door to a deeper understanding between father and son. As they worked together to overcome the barriers of the past, Laurie watched, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness for everything that had been lost and was now found. As autumn unfolded over the city, bringing with it the whisper of change, the scars of the past were palpable. But there was a shared determination to face them together. Frank, in particular, felt the weight of the responsibility to guide this transition. He had spent months reflecting on his past actions and missed opportunities. Now, with Laurie recovered and a developing relationship with Harvey, he wanted more than redemption. He craved a complete renewal of the bonds that had once been broken. On an afternoon aglow with the golden hues of the setting sun, Frank led Laurie to a beloved spot in the city, a tranquil park overlooking the river where twilight's beauty danced on the calm waters. It was the ideal setting for the moment Frank had meticulously planned, a moment he hoped would herald a new chapter in their lives. "Laurie," Frank began, his voice laden with emotion, "these past few months have been a journey of discovery and redemption for me. You and Harvey have shown me the true meaning of family, forgiveness, and love. I know the scars of the past don't heal overnight, but I am committed to doing whatever it takes to mend them." Laurie, touched by Frank's heartfelt words, felt a mixture of hope and caution in her heart. She gazed at him, recognizing the profound change within him. Then, Frank knelt down, revealing a small but elegant ring. "Laurie, I want to ask for a chance to build a new future together, not just as Harvey's parents, but as partners, as a family. Will you grant me that honor?" Though Laurie had somewhat anticipated this, Frank's proposal still took her breath away. Tears welled in her eyes, not just because of the proposal, but because of the journey they had undertaken to reach this point. "Yes, Frank," she whispered, her voice brimming with emotion. "Yes, I want to build that future with you." Laurie's acceptance sealed a commitment not only between them, but also with Harvey, who, though absent at that moment, was the invisible bond deeply uniting them. The road ahead would undoubtedly present challenges, but Frank, Laurie, and Harvey now faced the future as a united family, ready to forge a life together filled with love, understanding, and above all, redemption. This renewed commitment between Frank and Laurie symbolized their rekindled love and a vow to create a home where Harvey could flourish, surrounded by their unconditional love. Frank's proposal and Laurie's acceptance marked the dawn of a new era for the family. An era of hope, healing, and shared happiness. 2 years after the events that brought Frank, Laurie, and Harvey together, the family found themselves on a sunny spring afternoon, celebrating a moment of pure, uncontainable joy. The home they had built together resonated with laughter and lively conversations, a vibrant testament to their journey of healing and love. The reason for the celebration was as miraculous as it was symbolic: the birth of twins, a boy and a girl, who brought with them a new wave of hope and joy.